I was 13 the summer the man from Overlook Court decided we were his problem. Back then, I didn't think much about safety. It wasn't something I carried with me, like a phone or keys or fear. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Cedar Glen, Illinois, about 20 minutes outside Peoria. A middle-of-nowhere kind of suburb with dogwood trees, 4th of July parades, and no real crime to speak of. My mom used to say it was the kind of place you could forget the world in. And for a long time we did. Our street curled into a cul-de-sac at the edge of a small patch of woods. There were only 8 houses on our block, each with white shutters, trimmed hedges, and those decorative flag holders out front. We lived in the blue one at the end, with a cracked sidewalk and a big red maple tree out front that dropped leaves like confetti in the fall. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. My parents, Andrew and Lena Keating, were private people. Not standoffish, just reserved. Dad was a civil attorney who worked mostly from home. Mom was a cardiac nurse at St. Francis Hospital in Peoria, often pulling night shifts. They weren't the block party type. They preferred puzzles, wine on the patio, and a quiet house. I had a younger brother, Miles. He was 9, still in that age where he thought Nerf guns were the height of weaponry. We weren't especially close, but we got along, mostly. We weren't the kind of family that made enemies. We waved at neighbors, returned borrowed tools, shoveled the occasional driveway. And until that summer, I honestly believed nothing truly bad could ever touch us. Not there. Then came Leon Mercer. He moved in during the spring. March, I think. I remember because it was muddy, and our dog kept tracking paw prints into the hallway. Leon's house was 3 doors down from ours, an old green ranch style with peeling shutters and yellowed blinds that never lifted. I didn't see him much at first, just glimpses. He'd be out front dragging trash cans, hunched in a heavy work jacket even when it was warm, or standing in the garage, barely visible behind a stack of boxes, like he was waiting for something. My parents said he'd bought the place outright, cash, which was rare in our neighborhood. Most people had 30-year mortgages. We assumed he was retired, maybe a veteran, someone just looking to be left alone. And for a while we did. The first time I really saw him, was because of a basketball. It was early June, one of those sticky afternoons where the sky feels too close. Miles and I were shooting hoops in the driveway. The ball slipped from his hands, bounced down the sloped pavement, and rolled into Leon's yard. Not near the house, just a few feet onto his grass. I jogged after it. I'd barely stepped onto his lawn when the screen door slammed open. "Hey!" a voice barked. I froze. He was standing there in a sweat-stained flannel shirt and jeans that looked too thick for the heat. His hair was thin and wiry, the color of ash. His eyes were sharp and cold, like something you'd see behind a rifle scope. "Don't walk on my damn grass." I was just... I bent down quickly, grabbed the ball. "Sorry, it just rolled." "I don't care where it rolled," he growled, stepping closer. "You step foot on my property again, we're gonna have a problem. You understand me?" I nodded fast and backed off. My hands were shaking. That night at dinner, I told my parents. Dad frowned but shrugged it off. "Some people are just wound tight. Let's not stir the pot." So we didn't. We stayed away, kept to our yard, made sure nothing, not bikes, not balls, not even trash bags, ended up near his property. But it wasn't enough. About a week later, we woke up to find our recycling bin knocked over. Glass shattered across the sidewalk. Not the neighbors, just ours. The bin was dented like someone had taken a bat to it. Dad grumbled, cleaned it up, and chalked it up to a late-night windstorm. But I remember seeing muddy boot prints trailing away from the driveway, heading toward Leon's house. After that, it was small things. A garden light snapped in half. Our mailbox door bent at a weird angle. Dog poop smeared onto the porch steps. But we didn't own a dog anymore. Our lab, Daisy, had died that winter. One night, Mom was pulling into the driveway after a late shift. She was fumbling with her badge and phone when headlights suddenly lit up behind her. A car had pulled right up to her bumper. She said it sat there, unmoving, engine idling. When she got out and approached it, the vehicle backed up slowly and turned into Leon's driveway. That was the first time I saw fear on her face. Dad went over the next day, knocked on Leon's door. I watched from the upstairs window, chewing my nails to the quick. Leon didn't open it all the way, just cracked it enough to show one glaring eye. They talked, if you could call it that. Mostly Dad trying to be polite and Leon staring. When Dad came back, he looked pale. "What did he say?" Mom asked. "He said he hasn't done anything wrong, and he knows the law." That night we ordered security cameras, but somehow he always knew where they pointed. The harassment never happened within the frame, always just out of view, like he'd studied them. Then came the letters, handwritten notes left in the mailbox, folded into plastic sandwich bags. Sometimes they were just phrases, "You're being watched." "Justice always finds liars. The Blue House doesn't belong." Other times they were longer, rants about noise violations, about property lines, about how we were un-American and disrespectful. One letter said my father would know what it feels like to bleed soon. That one sent us to the police. They came, they nodded, they made a report, and they said the same thing. Unless there's a physical threat or he crosses the property, there's not much we can do. Physical threat, as if threats only counted when there was blood. One night I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. We never used it. Everything went to voicemail these days, but something told me to play it. There was static, then breathing, then a low voice distorted like it had been dragged across gravel. Some families need to be reminded what the end looks like. I dropped the remote. My dad played it again and again. He called the police. Again. Same answer. That's when the van showed up. A white panel van, no plates, parked at the end of the street, sometimes in front of our house, sometimes in front of his. Never moving, never running, just sitting. We asked around. No one knew who it belonged to. The DMV found no record. The cops came out, checked the inside, found nothing but a tarp and some old plastic jugs. They said it wasn't illegal to park on a public street. Mom stopped sleeping. She'd pace the hallway until dawn, listening for sounds. I found her one morning sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching a baseball bat and crying silently. We started house hunting. By October, we had a realtor, found a place 2 towns over, smaller but newer. Dad said we'd close by December, but Leon knew. He started standing at the end of his driveway at night, just standing, not looking at us directly, always angled away, but close enough that we felt it. And then, on Halloween night, everything came to a head. Miles and I were walking back from trick-or-treating. We weren't even dressed up, just wore old hoodies and carried pillowcases. The neighborhood was quiet. Most houses had gone dark by 9. As we neared our driveway, we saw something waiting on the porch. A box, plain, no markings, tied with string. My parents were already outside, Mom standing stiffly, Dad on the phone with the police. "We didn't order anything," Mom said, backing away. The officer told Dad not to open it, to wait. When they arrived, they brought gloves, flashlights, a scanner. They opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, of us, taken at different times, different angles, through our windows, at the grocery store, at school pickup, sleeping, reading, eating. There was even one of me in the bathtub. I don't remember much after that, just screaming, vomiting, the sense of the world turning sideways. The next morning, Leon was gone, vanished, house locked, curtains drawn, car missing. The cops issued a warrant. Inside his house, they found stacks of notebooks, pages filled with our names, our schedules, drawings of our house, of my face, of Miles. One notebook had a list titled "Necessary Steps." Next to it were check marks. The last line was, "Make it look like they disappeared." We moved in 3 days. We didn't wait for closing, didn't wait for goodbyes. We just packed up and left. We've never gone back. And sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if that box had come a week later? Or if we hadn't reported the pictures? Or if he had decided to wait inside the house next time? What haunts me most is what the officer said as we were leaving. "He's done this before." Story 2. I never used to lock my bedroom door at night, not until I moved to Overlook Court. Before that, I was the kind of person who left windows cracked for air, who didn't think twice about falling asleep with earbuds in or walking the dog at midnight. I grew up in Maple Creek, a sleepy town in northern Indiana. Everyone knew everyone else. We had block parties in summer, carolers at Christmas, and the kind of neighbors who left muffins on your doorstep when your mom got sick. For the first 23 years of my life, nothing truly bad had ever happened to me. I think that's why I ignored the early signs. I didn't know what real danger looked like. After college, I moved to Granfield, a small city about 3 hours south, to start my new job at a local publishing firm. It wasn't glamorous, mostly editing educational materials and pushing commas around, but it paid better than anything I'd find back home. I was lucky enough to rent a one-story bungalow on the edge of town, cheap because it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The street was quiet, a cul-de-sac called Overlook Court, 10 homes all nearly identical, beige siding, chain-link fences, faded welcome mats. I picked it because it felt safe, familiar, like Maple Creek. I moved in mid-February. Snow still crusted the lawns, but the bones of spring were in the air. The first time I met my neighbor, he was scraping ice off his truck windshield in the driveway next to mine. He looked to be in his late 50s. Stooped posture, silver hair tucked under a camo baseball cap, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Morning," I called, trying to sound friendly. He barely glanced up, just nodded once and went back to his scraping. His mailbox said Walter Payton, written in faded Sharpie. He lived alone as far as I could tell. No kids, no visitors, just the occasional package left on his porch and his beat-up red truck that never seemed to move. The curtains in his windows were always drawn. In the beginning, I didn't think much of him. Some people just prefer to keep to themselves. I respected that. But by week 2, I started noticing strange things. One night I was brushing my teeth when I caught a flicker of movement in the bathroom mirror. A shadow across the frosted glass of the high window. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, heart thudding. It was gone in a second. I convinced myself it was a bird or a trick of the light. After all, Walter's house sat to the right of mine. His backyard fence ran alongside mine, and our houses were barely 10 feet apart. Maybe it had just been him walking past a window. But it happened again, and again, always at night, always when I was in the bathroom. A part of me wanted to laugh it off, but something deeper, older, instinctual, made me start locking the bathroom door. Then came the noise. It started as a soft creaking sound, like weight shifting on wood. At first I thought it was the heating vents or the pipes. This house was old after all, but the timing was too precise. The sound only came when I was alone, and always from the ceiling above the bathroom and hallway. It wasn't random. It was like footsteps, slow and careful. Someone trying not to be heard. I told myself it was squirrels. Maybe raccoons. Called a pest control guy. He came, looked around the attic, and found nothing but old insulation and spiderwebs. "House is clean," he said. "You probably just got a noisy old frame." But one night around 2 a.m., I was woken by a metallic clinking noise. It was coming from the air vent in my bedroom ceiling. I sat up in bed, every nerve alive. The vent was old, a square of flimsy metal held in place by 4 screws. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Metal against metal, like someone unscrewing it. I didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed, frozen, eyes on the vent. In the morning, I got a chair and checked it. The screws were still there, but looser than I remembered. I tightened them, trying to shake the dread that had settled like wet wool on my shoulders. That afternoon, I mentioned it to the lady across the street. Her name was Denise, a retired teacher with a fluffy white dog named Bobo. She always wore a sun hat, even in winter, and had that warm, chatty energy that made you trust her instantly. "Walter," she said when I told her about the noises. "I don't want to gossip, but yeah, he gives me the creeps too." "What do you mean?" Denise glanced around, lowered her voice. "He's been here longer than anyone. I don't think he works. Never seen him leave the house unless it's to take the bins out. But the weird thing, every family that's lived next to him moved out fast. 6 months, tops." That hit me like a punch. Seriously? She nodded. I remember a young couple before you. They had a baby. One night, the woman came running over here crying, said she saw someone outside the nursery window at 3 a.m., but by the time her husband checked, no one was there. 2 weeks later, they were gone. I felt ice spread through my chest. Have you ever called the police? I asked. Oh, honey, she said with a sad smile. About what? He hasn't technically done anything. That night I locked every door and window. I even slid a chair under the doorknob in my bedroom. I felt stupid, paranoid, but my gut wouldn't let me ignore it anymore. A few days later, I caught Walter watching me. I'd just come back from the grocery store, arms full of bags. As I turned toward my front door, I saw movement through the slats of my window blinds. I stepped closer and peeked. He was standing in his driveway, not moving, just standing there, staring straight at my house, at me. His face was blank, not angry, not smiling, just watching, like a statue. I ducked back, heart pounding. 10 minutes later, I peeked again. He was gone. That weekend, I invited my cousin Matthew to stay. He was 25, 6'3", former high school linebacker. If anyone could make me feel safe, it was him. Saturday night, we stayed up late playing video games in the living room. Around midnight, I went to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something. The attic hatch, the square cutout in the ceiling with a pull string, was open, just a crack, maybe an inch, enough to see darkness up there. I froze. I hadn't touched it, not once since moving in. Matt, I called, voice shaking. Come here. He came, took one look, and said, that wasn't like that earlier. He grabbed a broom and nudged the hatch shut. It made a soft click as it sealed. Neither of us slept much. The next morning, we went up into the attic. What we found changed everything. There was a section of insulation pushed aside, as if someone had been crawling through it. Dust patterns broken by elbow-shaped grooves. At the far end, above the bathroom, we found an old camping mat, a blanket, and an empty granola bar wrapper. A used water bottle. Someone had been living up there. The police came. They were polite, professional. But like Denise said, they couldn't do much. No fingerprints, no cameras. They knocked on Walter's door. He answered, looking half asleep, and denied everything. Claimed he didn't even have attic access. Must have been kid, he mumbled. But here's the thing. The wall separating our attic spaces? It had been broken, the bricks smashed in from his side. The cops documented it, took photos, gave me a case number, and left. I didn't wait. I packed everything I could into my car and drove straight back to Maple Creek. Stayed with my parents for 3 weeks while I hunted for a new apartment. I never went back to Overlook Court. My lease was broken with help from a lawyer friend. I lost my deposit, didn't care. Sometimes I still wonder how long he watched me, if he was up there while I showered, if he had a camera, if he ever planned to do more than watch. What still keeps me up at night is how normal he looked. Just a lonely man with a baseball cap and a cigarette. You never really know who lives next door. Story 3, I never planned on moving back to Dayton. After 4 years at Penn State and another 2 bouncing around Philadelphia, I thought I'd finally put my hometown behind me. But life doesn't always play fair. In late February, my dad had a stroke. It was a mild one, thank God, but it still rattled our family. Mom called me the next morning, her voice a tight whisper like she was trying not to fall apart. I don't want to make you feel guilty, sweetie, but I could use the help. So I packed up my life in a single U-Haul, left behind my marketing job in the city I'd started to call home, and moved into a 1-bedroom unit at the Boulder Heights Apartments, just 10 minutes from my parents' place in East Dayton. It wasn't glamorous. Beige carpet, creaky balcony, old AC unit that wheezed louder than it cooled, but the rent was affordable, and the complex was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. The kind of place where you'd hear a lawnmower and immediately know whose it was. There were only 4 buildings total, each 3 stories tall, 12 units each. I moved into 2B, right above the laundry room and directly across from a weirdly silent apartment with a metal door labeled 3C. At first, it didn't mean anything to me. I had bigger things to worry about. Driving Dad to his therapy sessions, helping Mom organize their finances, interviewing for remote jobs that barely paid enough to cover groceries. For a while, I didn't even realize apartment 3C was occupied. Then I started hearing the tapping. It began late at night, usually around 1:30 a.m. A soft, rhythmic click, 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 like someone was gently rapping a coin against glass. At first, I thought it was the pipes, then maybe the elevator. But the sound was always so precise. Always the same 3 clicks. Always just once a night. I only started suspecting apartment 3C after I walked past it on my way back from taking out the trash one night. The peephole on the door had tape over it, and the door frame was covered in scratch marks, deep ones, like someone had dug at the wood with a screwdriver or keys. It made my stomach twist. I remember telling my mom over lunch that weekend. "It's probably just an older tenant," she said, sipping her soup. "Some people don't like being bothered." But something about 3C kept gnawing at me. One afternoon, I bumped into Mrs. Fletcher in the hallway, the sweet retired teacher from 1A. I casually asked her, "Hey, do you know who lives in 3C?" Her expression tightened. "That's Mr. Halpern's unit." "Mr. Halpern? He's quiet, keeps to himself." I waited, but she didn't elaborate. Just smiled, wished me a good day, and shuffled off with her canvas tote full of library books. The next time I heard the tapping, I pressed my ear to the wall that bordered 3C. Nothing. Just stillness. Not even the hum of a TV or the creak of movement. It was like no one lived there at all. Then came the note. It was a Monday. I came home from a grocery run to find a sheet of lined paper folded in half and taped to my door. I opened it slowly, half expecting it to be from the building manager about rent or parking. But all it said was, "Stop watching me. You don't know what I am." My hands went cold. I looked around the hallway, empty. No footsteps, no doors closing. I took the note inside and locked the door behind me, heart hammering. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, maybe one of the teenagers from Building 4. But deep down, I knew it was him, whoever lived in 3C. I didn't sleep that night. I started avoiding my own hallway. I'd use the stairwell at the far end of the building just to avoid walking past 3C. When I got back late from visiting my parents, I'd do a double check. First at the landing, then again at my door, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. It got worse. 3 weeks later, I was woken up at 2:17 a.m. by the sound of my doorknob turning. I lay frozen in bed, eyes wide, barely breathing. The sound was unmistakable, metal clicking as someone tried, slowly and carefully, to open the door. I grabbed my phone and hit record, my hands shaking too badly to call 911. I didn't want the noise to stop. I wanted proof. Then it stopped. Just stopped. No footsteps, no retreating shuffle, just silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I showed the video to the building manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Ron. He nodded, frowned, then walked with me to check the security cams. Of course, the hallway camera outside my unit had been malfunctioning. Ron swore he'd have it fixed, but I could see it in his face. He didn't believe me. Or worse, he did, and didn't want to get involved. That's when I decided to talk to the neighbor next door, Elias, a former Army medic who lived in 2A. He was the type of guy who always wore the same gray hoodie, always smelled faintly of motor oil, and had a quiet seriousness that made you feel like he saw things you didn't. When I told him about the doorknob, the note, the hallway tapping, he didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He just stared at my face for a moment and said, "Has he knocked yet?" I blinked. "What?" "Don't open the door if he knocks," he said flatly. "Even if he says your name. Especially if he says your name." "Why would he?" Elias shook his head. "Don't ask. Just promise me." I did, mostly because I was too freaked out not to. 2 nights later it happened. 3 a.m. I woke up to 3 soft knocks at my door. Not the frantic banging of someone in trouble. Just soft, patient knocks. Then silence. Then my name. Riley. The voice was calm, male, familiar but not right, like someone trying to mimic my father's voice and failing. "Riley, open up!" My entire body went cold. I sat up, clutching my blanket to my chest, breath shallow. "Riley, I know you're awake." I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The voice outside the door let out a long, shaky sigh. I didn't want to do it this way. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my limbs frozen. Then I heard the doorknob turn again. Just once. Just a test. Then silence. In the morning, I checked the hallway. There were no footprints, but a thin trail of something dark and sticky led from my door, all the way to 3C. I moved out that weekend. Didn't wait for the lease to end. Didn't bother getting my security deposit back. I moved in with my parents until I could find a new job, a new city, anything to get away from Boulder Heights. A month later, Elias called me. They took him out, he said. Halpern. The guy in 3C cops came after someone, finally filed a report about a smell. They found stuff inside. I didn't ask what stuff meant. I didn't want to know. But Elias told me one last thing before we hung up. They found hundreds of cassette tapes in his closet, all labeled with apartment numbers, dates, times I swallowed. Was there one for 2B? He hesitated. Yeah, there was. That was a year ago. I still wake up at 3:08 sometimes. Still flinch when someone knocks at my door. I haven't been back to Boulder Heights, and I never will. But the worst part isn't what happened. It's what I'll never know. How long was he watching me? How many nights did he stand at my door before I ever noticed? And what would have happened if I'd opened it? I try not to think about it, but sometimes, on the nights when it's quiet, too quiet, I swear I hear a voice outside my window, a soft, familiar whisper. Riley, open up. Story 4. I moved to Granger Street in the fall of 2022, thinking I was finally catching a break. I'd just gotten out of a 7-year relationship with someone who, by the end, made me feel like a guest in my own life. The breakup left me raw, untethered. I needed space, both physically and emotionally, to figure out who the hell I was without him. I packed my stuff into the back of a borrowed pickup truck, left Charlotte behind, and drove across 3 states to a small town in western Kentucky called Merrow Creek. Population, just under 14,000. Enough of a town to have a grocery store, a coffee shop, and bad traffic near the high school in the mornings, but small enough that people still waved when they passed each other on the street. I found a rental through a lady named Denise, who listed local properties on a Facebook group. $850 a month, 2 bedrooms, fenced yard, no credit check. She even let me bring my cat, Ollie. It wasn't glamorous. The house was a squat, faded blue 1-story with peeling paint, mismatched shingles, and a porch light that flickered whenever it rained. But it had privacy, quiet, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Or so I thought. The street was narrow and quiet. 5 houses on my side, 6 across. Mostly retirees and a couple of younger couples with kids. My place was sandwiched between 2 others. A white house on my left, where a retired librarian named Jan lived, and a dull gray place on my right. That one was a bit more mysterious. When I moved in, the gray house looked empty. Shades drawn, no cars in the driveway, no movement in the windows. Denise told me an older man had owned it but passed away the year before, and his grandson had recently moved in. Don't worry, she'd said over the phone. He keeps to himself. Little odd, maybe, but harmless. The first time I saw him was a week after I moved in. It was a Tuesday early evening, just after sunset. I was taking out the trash when I noticed him standing in his backyard, not doing anything, just standing by the chain-link fence that separated our properties. He had a lean frame, mid-30s maybe, with thinning hair and a long, narrow face. He wasn't looking at me exactly, just in my direction. I gave a polite wave. He didn't wave back. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he wasn't a neighborly type. The next few days passed quietly. I focused on unpacking, painting over the yellowing kitchen walls, fixing a slow leak under the bathroom sink. Ollie made himself at home, curling in sunbeams and scratching the couch, even though I told him not to. Then little things started happening. The motion light in my backyard would click on in the middle of the night. Sometimes more than once. I'd go out expecting to see a raccoon or a stray dog, but the yard would be empty, the gate still closed. Another night, I heard footsteps on my porch around 2 a.m. Not just footsteps, pauses, like someone was standing still, listening. I froze in bed, clutching my phone, waiting. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I found a cigarette butt on the welcome mat. I don't smoke. I mentioned it to Jan one day while she was pruning her rose bushes. "Oh, him?" she said, glancing toward the gray house. "Name's Wade. Keeps odd hours. Used to see him walking up and down the street at night. Always looks like he's waiting for something." Waiting for what? I didn't ask. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'd come here to start over, not to stir up drama or jump to conclusions. But Wade made it hard. Sometimes I'd catch him peeking through the slats in his blinds, just watching. Once I was painting the front steps and looked up to see him standing at his window, unblinking. Another time, I caught him in his backyard again, just like before, standing still, facing my house. One evening I came home to find my back gate open. I always kept it latched. Always. Ollie wasn't allowed outside, and I made damn sure the gate stayed shut. That night I found him crouched under the couch, ears back, fur puffed, like he'd been chased. I checked every room, every window. Nothing broken, nothing missing, just that gate, hanging wide open. I installed a camera above my back door the next day. The next night I caught him. The footage showed Wade entering my yard around 1:17 a.m. He didn't use the gate. He climbed the fence like it was nothing. Stood there staring at my door for 2 minutes. Then he walked over to the window and just stood again, facing it, breathing heavy. Then he turned and left the way he came. My stomach twisted watching it. There was no mistaking his face. I took the footage to the police the next morning. The officer behind the counter was polite, but dismissive. "Well, he didn't break in," he said, scratching something on a clipboard. "Trespassing, maybe, but that fence ain't much of a deterrent." I told them I was scared. He shrugged. "We'll file a report, but without a pattern or threat, it's unlikely we can do much." I went home that day feeling like I was overreacting. Maybe he was just unstable. Maybe he wasn't dangerous. Then the notes started. The first one was shoved under my door. A single piece of notebook paper, folded in half. Written in tight, messy scrawl. "I see you walk at night. You look sad. I think you want someone to understand you." I threw it out. The second came 2 days later. "I heard you crying last night. I know what that's like. You don't have to be alone." I hadn't cried out loud, not once. That one I took to the police. They told me to install more cameras. "Get a motion alarm, maybe a dog," they suggested. The third note was different. It came with something attached. Taped to the page was a photo of me, taken through the living room window. I was sitting on the couch in pajamas, eating cereal, watching TV. "You look pretty when you smile. Don't pretend you don't see me." That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind set me on edge. I locked every window, barricaded the doors with chairs, kept a hammer under my pillow. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't break the lease, and I couldn't afford to move again. 3 nights later, it escalated. It was 3:43 a.m. I remember because I'd glanced at the microwave just before it happened. I was dozing on the couch with Ollie curled on my chest when the motion light clicked on. Then, 3 soft knocks at the back door. I froze. A 4th knock. Then silence. I crept to the kitchen, barefoot, heart pounding. Through the frosted glass of the back door, I could see a shadow. Still, waiting. I didn't speak. Didn't move. Then I heard it. My name. "Mara." A whisper, drawn out like breath through teeth. "Mara, I know you're awake." I couldn't move. "You left the window cracked." I ran, not to the door, to my phone. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. Told them someone was outside. Gave my address. As I spoke, I heard something. Metal scraping. The window in the laundry room. The lock. He was trying to lift it. I screamed into the phone. The operator told me to stay calm. Officers were en route. And then, silence. By the time the cops arrived, Wade was gone. They found the window half open, muddy prints on the sill, scratches near the lock. One of the officers took my statement while the other knocked on Wade's door. He answered, told them I was delusional, said I'd been watching him and sending signals. He told them I wanted him to come over. They didn't arrest him, just warned him to stay off my property. The next morning, I found a dead bird on my porch. Its neck snapped. I packed a suitcase and left that afternoon. Stayed in a motel an hour away until Denise helped me break the lease. Wade never got charged. I heard later from John that he moved back to Georgia with some cousin or uncle, but by then I was already gone. Now, almost a year later, I live in a third-floor apartment in Nashville. No backyard, no windows low enough to reach. I triple-check every lock. I haven't opened the curtains in months. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:43 a.m., heart pounding, sure I heard my name whispered through the door. And once, just once, I found a note taped to my mailbox. No words, just a photo of me standing at my window looking out. Story 5. I used to think danger had a look, like a man in a dark hoodie creeping through shadows, or someone with twitchy eyes and shaky hands. The kind of thing movies warn you about. But I know better now. Danger doesn't always snarl or announce itself. Sometimes it wears a grin, offers to help you carry groceries, or splashes around in your grandma's pool like it's no big deal. The summer I turned 12 was the first time I truly learned that. That year had already felt different from the start. My parents were arguing more than usual, slamming doors and whispering in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. I was old enough to understand money was tight and that Dad had lost another job. Mom had taken extra shifts at the pharmacy and signed me and my younger brother Mason up to spend the month of July with our grandmother in Dunlow, Tennessee. Dunlow wasn't much, a sleepy, sun-beaten little town where the sidewalks cracked like dry skin and the summer heat clung to your neck like a wet towel. But Grandma's place was safe, or it had always felt that way before. She lived in a little yellow one-story house at the corner of Sycamore and Bridge. No air conditioning, just fans in the windows and a porch swing that creaked like it had secrets. The backyard was her pride and joy, a big fenced-in space with a half-dead garden, a rusted metal swing set, and one of those inflatable pools you could buy at Walmart for $40. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. Me, Mason, and our two cousins, Carly and Jake, spent most days out there half-drenched and sunburnt. Grandma would bring out plastic cups full of store-brand lemonade and bowls of grapes we'd eat straight out of the freezer. The first time I saw the boy behind the fence, it was the third day of July. We'd just finished bombing each other with water balloons, our skins slick and our hair stuck to our faces, when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A boy, lean, shirtless, probably a couple years older than me, stood at the wooden fence separating Grandma's backyard from the house next door. He had light brown hair, buzzed on the sides and longer on top, and a faint scar that ran from his jaw to his neck. His eyes were this icy blue that almost didn't belong to someone that young. He didn't smile when I saw him, just stared. Mason noticed first. "Hey, you want to join?" The boy shrugged, resting his arms on the top of the fence like he belonged there. "Maybe," he said. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether your grandma lets strangers into her backyard." "She might," Mason said, "if you ask nice." Carly gave him a look. "What's your name?" "Lucas," he said. "Lucas Callahan. I live right there." He pointed his chin toward the gray, half-abandoned-looking house next door, where weeds reached up through the porch and all the window blinds were bent or missing. "I didn't know anyone lived there," I said. Lucas's eyes flicked to me, locking for a second. Something in his gaze made my stomach twist. Not fear exactly, just cold. "Most people don't," he replied. Grandma came out a few minutes later with a pitcher of lemonade and 2 bags of off-brand chips. When we asked if Lucas could come over, she hesitated. Her eyes lingered on the house next door longer than necessary. Finally, she said, "As long as everyone behaves and no one drags mud into my kitchen?" Lucas smiled for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. He was fine at first. Funny in that sarcastic way older kids are. But he made the others laugh. He jumped into the pool without asking, soaking everyone, but no one cared. He played rough, but not too rough. He teased Mason and Carly and even me, but not cruelly. It was easy to forget the way he had just appeared, the way he seemed so comfortable in a place he'd never been invited to before. But that first day wasn't the problem. It started to shift a few days later. Lucas came by almost every day after that, slipping over the fence like a ghost. He never knocked, never asked, just appeared. He'd tell stories that didn't sound real, about fights he'd been in, kids he'd handled, his dad teaching him how to break a man's nose in under 5 seconds. Carly called him a liar once. The way he stared at her made my skin crawl. I began to avoid him when I could. He didn't like that. One day while the others were inside getting snacks, Lucas and I were left alone. I was sitting on the swing set, kicking at the dirt, when he wandered over. "You don't talk much, do you?" he asked. "I talk plenty," he smirked. "Not to me." I shrugged. He leaned down so his face was inches from mine. "You think you're better than me?" "What?" Number. "Yeah, you do, I can see it. All of you think that. Like I'm some trash because my house ain't painted, or my mom doesn't bake cookies or whatever." "I didn't say that." "You don't have to. You look it." Then he walked away. Just like that. A few days later, something worse happened. It was a scorcher. High 90s, not a cloud in the sky. Grandma had set up the sprinkler in the yard, and we were taking turns sprinting through it like idiots. Lucas was already there when I got outside, already wet, already acting like he lived there. We played a stupid game of tag that somehow turned into wrestling in the grass. It was Lucas's idea. I didn't want to, but he wouldn't shut up about it, kept calling me chicken, kept pushing. Eventually, I agreed. Within seconds of starting, he tackled me hard. I hit the ground wrong, air punched out of my lungs, the grass scraping my arms. Before I could recover, he was on top of me, straddling my chest, one hand pushing my head down. "Say you give up," he grinned. I tried to push him off. "Get off me!" He didn't. Instead, he pressed down harder. "You're weak," he whispered, like he wanted me to hear it only. Mason saw it. So did Carly. They ran over yelling, and Lucas finally let go. I sat up coughing, dizzy and furious. "Jesus, what is wrong with you?" Carly shouted. Lucas stood up, brushing off his knees. "We were playing. Y'all are soft." Grandma came out after that. Mason told her what happened. So did Carly. Lucas got banned from the yard. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Lucas started watching us from the fence again. Just standing there, silent, unmoving, staring. Every day, like clockwork. Sometimes he whispered things. Other times he'd whistle or just smile, that same cold smile like he knew something we didn't. Once he carved something into the wooden slats with a pocket knife. I only saw it briefly before Grandma painted over it the next day. It said, "You're not safe." One night, I woke up to tapping on my bedroom window. Grandma had let me sleep in the guest room by the backyard, while the others bunked in the living room with the fan. The window looked out over the yard. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was branches, but then I heard it again, rhythmic, deliberate. I pulled the curtain back. Lucas was standing just outside, eyes wide and unblinking. He lifted one hand and pointed at me. Then he drew a finger across his throat. After that, Grandma installed a motion sensor light and made us stay inside after dark. Dad came to visit a few days later. When he heard everything, he nearly ripped the fence down himself. He went next door, banged on the door until Lucas's mom came out. This gaunt, sickly woman who looked like she hadn't slept in years. She barely said 2 words before closing the door on him. After that, we didn't see Lucas for a while. We thought it was over. It wasn't. The last time I saw Lucas was on the night of the 28th. A storm had rolled in heavy and fast. Lightning lit up the whole yard in pulses, thunder shaking the walls. Grandma tucked us in early, but I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., I heard something. A creak. The unmistakable squeak of the old backyard gate. I slid out of bed and peeked through the curtain. The gate was swinging open. The motion light flicked on. There, standing in the middle of the yard, was Lucas. Shirtless, soaking wet, holding something. A knife. I don't remember screaming, but I know I did because Grandma burst in seconds later. Lights flipped on. Doors opened. Dad was staying that weekend. He came out with a baseball bat. But by the time we got outside, Lucas was gone. Knife dropped in the grass. Footprints in the mud led back over the fence. The police were called. Reports were filed. Nothing ever came of it. A week later, the Callahans moved out in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no forwarding address. It's been 10 years since that summer. I haven't been back to Dunlow in a long time. Grandma passed away last year. Mason's in college now. Carly's married. Sometimes I still dream about that backyard, about the tap on the window, the look in Lucas's eyes as he held me down, as he smiled through the glass. I wake up choking, heart pounding, water in my lungs that isn't really there. Because here's the thing, you think you'll always know when something's wrong, but you won't, not always. Sometimes danger wears a boy's face. Sometimes it climbs your fence, splashes in your pool, and calls it play. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what someone does to you, it's knowing they meant to. Story 6. I never thought I'd end up renting a house in a town like Granger. For most of my adult life, I bounced between cities, Charlotte, Nashville, Cincinnati, chasing jobs and cheaper rent. But after a string of layoffs, a bad breakup, and a sudden spike in housing costs, I finally gave up trying to make things work in the city. I packed up what was left of my things and drove 3 hours south to Granger, Tennessee. Granger's the kind of place that barely registers on a map. One gas station, a post office that shuts by 4. No Uber, no DoorDash, no nightlife. Unless you count the bar by the old train depot where the same 8 people drink every Friday. But it was cheap. I found a listing on a Facebook group. 2-bed, 1-bath, single-story home just outside town limits, with a big yard and a rent that seemed too good to be real. It wasn't perfect. The wood floors were warped from past water damage. The plumbing whined every time I turned the tap, and the appliances were probably from the late 90s. But it was quiet, peaceful, and after the year I'd had, that's all I wanted. The house sat at the bottom of a steep hill, tucked under a thicket of oak trees that turned everything golden in the fall. To the left, a vacant lot with a rusted shed. To the right, about 20 feet away, was another house. Pale blue, wide porch, lace curtains drawn shut even in daylight. I asked the landlord, a wiry man named Carl who smelled like cigarettes and beef jerky, who lived next door. He just shrugged and said, "Old guy, keeps to himself, name's Vernon." At first, I barely noticed him. I'd see a curtain twitch now and then. Once, when I was dragging a bookcase in from the car, I caught a glimpse. Thin man, maybe late 60s, gray beard, wide-brimmed hat, just watching from his porch like he was waiting for something. I waved. He didn't wave back. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. I unpacked, got my internet installed, started working remotely again, contract gigs mostly, editing, transcriptions, the occasional ad copy. Life settled into a rhythm. I'd wake early, walk the half-mile dirt trail that looped behind the property, make coffee, sit at my rickety desk by the front window, and work until my eyes blurred. Nights were slow, quiet, too quiet sometimes. That's when I first noticed the noises. It started small. Just after midnight, I'd hear footsteps, slow, dragging steps, like someone pacing through dry leaves. Always just outside the window, always too soft to be certain. At first, I chalked it up to raccoons or a deer, maybe even my nerves. I'd spent too long living in cities where noise meant life, sirens, dogs, laughter through the walls. This silence, it pressed in. Then came the knocking. Not on my door. On his. It was a Tuesday night, early October. I'd just finished brushing my teeth when I heard it. 3 slow knocks from next door. Then silence. I leaned toward my open bathroom window. A beat passed, then another set of knocks, louder this time. I waited, toothbrush still in hand, half expecting someone to start shouting. But no one did. The next morning I saw Vernon outside for the first time. He was kneeling in the grass, planting something in the narrow strip of dirt by his porch. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and cleared my throat. "Morning." He didn't look up. I tried again. "Sorry if I'm being nosy, but did someone stop by your place last night?" He kept digging. One gnarled hand patted the soil down. "Sir?" Finally he stood, brushed dirt from his pants, and turned. His eyes were pale, watery, but focused. "There ain't no visitors here after dark," he said. Then he went back inside. I should have left it there. I should have taken the hint, gone inside, locked my doors, and ignored whatever was going on next door. But I didn't. Something about his voice chilled me. Not the words, the way he said them. Flat, final, like a rule. A rule he hadn't made but followed. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard the knocking again. This time I got out of bed and tiptoed to the front of the house. Through the blinds I saw her, a girl, couldn't have been older than 15. Long hair, white dress, barefoot, standing on Vernon's porch, head tilted down like she was looking at the floor. She raised her arm, knocked again. 3 times, exactly like before. I froze. Something about her didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way she stood, unnaturally still. Or maybe it was the fact that Vernon didn't open the door, didn't even peek out. After a full minute, she stepped back and turned. I ducked, heart racing, as her face angled toward my window. She didn't knock on my door. She just walked, slow, deliberate, across the grass and disappeared behind the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep paralysis. Maybe a dream. But when I stepped outside, something caught my eye. Footprints, barefoot, small, leading from Vernon's porch to mine. That was when I bought cameras, just cheap motion sensor ones off Amazon. I installed one on the front porch and another pointing toward the trees. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? The recordings were worse. The next 3 nights, nothing. Then the 4th night, Friday around 2:20 a.m., she came back. The girl, same white dress, same slow walk. She stood in the yard between our houses and looked straight at the camera. The footage wasn't high res, but you could make out her eyes. They were black, like someone had dropped ink into them. She didn't knock that night. She just stood there for 6 full minutes, then turned and walked back into the woods. I showed the footage to Carl, the landlord. He looked at me like I was asking him to solve a math equation. "Local kids," he said, waving a hand. "Some of them like to screw around, dress up. Halloween's coming." "She didn't blink," I said. "She stared at the camera for 6 minutes, Carl." He shrugged. "You want me to put up a light out there or something?" That was the last time I talked to him. I tried researching the area. Nothing much came up. Granger didn't have a local paper, just a Facebook page filled with lost pets and bake sales. I asked around at the bar. Nobody had ever heard of a girl matching that description. But one night, an older guy, Ray, I think his name was, leaned in after overhearing me and said, "You're in Vernon's place, huh?" I nodded. He chewed his lip. "My brother lived there years ago, back when that whole hill was still woods." "What happened to him?" Ray didn't answer. He just said, "Tell Vernon you heard the knocking. See what he says." I did. A week later, it had rained all day and the trees were dripping like they were weeping. I saw Vernon on his porch, same wide-brimmed hat, just staring into the woods. I stepped over, camera footage on my phone ready to show him. But before I could speak, he said, "You heard her." My breath caught. "What?" "The girl. You heard her knocking." I didn't answer. He nodded to himself. "She comes when it's quiet, when things get too still out here. She's been looking for a door." I felt cold all over. "Who is she?" He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something like fear in his expression. "She used to live here, before they cleared the woods. Her family built that house way back in the 30s. Something bad happened. Nobody talks about it, but we all know. She drowned in the creek behind the hill." I turned to look. The trees were so dense back there, I'd never even seen a creek. "They never found her body," Vernon continued. "Just a trail of wet footprints leading back to the house. Why is she still here? Because someone opened a door, and now she doesn't know how to shut it." I went back inside and cried. Not out of fear, not really. It was more like grief, like I'd been handed a truth I didn't want. That night the knocking came again. Not on Vernon's door. Mine. 3 knocks. Slow. Hollow. I didn't answer, but the camera showed her, standing there, her wet hair clinging to her face, her mouth open like she was singing, except there was no sound. The final night came 2 days later. The power cut out just after midnight. My phone battery was low. I lit a candle, curled on the couch, tried to stay calm. Then I heard it. Not knocking, weeping, from the woods. Deep, guttural sobs that didn't stop. They came closer, louder, like the whole forest was crying. I opened the door before I could stop myself, and there she was. She looked different, older. Her eyes were gone, just black pits. But her mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear. Behind her in the trees, shapes moved. Dozens of them, watching. I slammed the door and didn't sleep. When the sun rose, everything was normal. But Vernon was gone. His house was empty. No furniture, no clothes. The porch plants dead. Carl swears no one was renting it. But I know what I saw. Now I live with the lights on. The cameras still roll. And some nights when the wind dies and the world feels too quiet, I hear her. Knocking, looking for a door. I don't answer. I don't think anyone should. Story 7. I never really believed in bad omens until I moved to Carolina Ridge. I was 20 when it all began, fresh out of community college, finally transferring to a university to finish my degree in environmental science. It was a big deal. My mom cried when she dropped me off, her car stuffed with clothes, cookware, and boxes labeled in shaky Sharpie. We didn't have much growing up, so going to a university, even a state one like Piedmont U, felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. The problem was money. It always was. My dad left when I was 12, and since then, it had been just me and my mom, scraping by in a 2-bedroom apartment in northern Alabama. Scholarships paid for my classes, and I worked weekends at a plant nursery back home. But dorms? That was too much. So we found this listing online. Affordable 1-bedroom guest home, quiet neighborhood, utilities included, walking distance to Piedmont University. It sounded too good to be true, and I guess it was. The place was in a quiet residential suburb on the edge of a town called Carolina Ridge, about a 15-minute walk from campus. The house belonged to an older couple, the Larkins, who lived in the main property up front. My place was a detached guest house tucked behind their backyard, separated by a short white fence and some azalea bushes. The rent was cheap, and the couple seemed polite enough. Mr. Larkin was soft-spoken and liked to talk about his days as a history teacher. Mrs. Larkin baked too many pies and always offered me slices when I came home from class. Everything seemed fine. For the first 2 months, I settled into a routine. Classes, late-night study sessions, occasional dinners with a few people from my lab group. I called my mom every Sunday and told her everything was okay. And then I met him. His name was Raymond Cutler. He lived alone in the blue house next to the Larkins, separated from me by a narrow alley and a chain-link fence. The first time I saw him was on a Thursday morning in late September. I was rushing out the door, half-eaten granola bar in one hand, backpack slung over my shoulder, when he called out. "Morning," he said loud and clear. His voice made me stop in my tracks. I turned to see him standing in his driveway, watering a patch of dying grass. He looked like someone's uncle, late 50s, thin, wiry, with short salt and pepper hair and a mustache that didn't quite match. He wore a brown work shirt tucked into jeans, and his sneakers were spotless. Good morning," I said, offering a small wave. "Didn't mean to startle you," he smiled. "You're new around here. Just moved in." "Yeah, a couple months ago," I replied. He nodded, letting the hose fall to his side. "I used to teach at Piedmont. Chemistry. Retired early, though. Got tired of the politics. You a student?" "Yep. Environmental science." "Good field," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Smart choice. We need more people who care about the world." He smiled again, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It didn't reach his eyes. I made a polite excuse and hurried off. That should have been the end of it. Neighborly small talk and nothing more. But he started popping up more and more. At first, it was just the usual greetings. Then it became small conversations, asking how my classes were going, what building I had lectures in, what time I usually got back. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just being friendly, maybe a bit lonely. But it wasn't just that, it was the way he watched me. If I opened my window to let air in while I studied, I'd sometimes catch him in his yard, staring. Not working, not doing anything. Just standing with his arms crossed. When I waved, he wouldn't wave back. Sometimes he'd smile, sometimes he wouldn't. Once around 10 p.m., I stepped outside to take out the trash and saw him crouched in his driveway, petting a dog I'd never seen before. As soon as he heard my door, he stood up and looked right at me. "Late night," he said. I nodded and threw my trash bag into the bin. "Be careful," he added. "Some real weirdos out there." Then he turned and walked back into his house. After that, I started pulling the blinds more. My stomach twisted a little whenever I saw that blue house. But still, I tried to be rational. He hadn't done anything wrong. Not technically. The first time it crossed the line was in October. I had just come home from a group study session. It was late, maybe 11:30, and I was unlocking my front door when I noticed something lying at the base of the steps. A small gift bag. I bent down, heart already thudding. Inside was a jar of homemade jam and a folded note that said, "For those long nights of studying, thought you could use something sweet." There was no name, just that tight, careful handwriting that looked like someone had practiced every letter. I didn't touch the jam. The next morning, I walked straight to the Larkins' porch and knocked. Mr. Larkin answered, surprised to see me. "Hey, Mr. Larkin, do you know if Ray, your neighbor, has ever done something like this before?" I held up the gift bag. He stared at it for a long second. "Ray Cutler?" he asked. "Yeah, he's a bit odd, quiet, keeps to himself mostly. He's been kind of watching me, leaving things, making weird comments," I said. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's creeping me out." He nodded slowly. "I'll talk to him," he said, but there was something in his face, hesitation, maybe fear. "Is there something I should know?" I asked. He gave me a tired look. "Just trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it." I started locking my doors during the day too. I got one of those metal rods to jam under the doorknob, just in case. My heart would jump every time I heard the wind brush against the windows. Still, I tried to focus on school. There were midterms, labs, deadlines. I stayed late on campus as much as I could. The Larkins checked in once or twice, but mostly I kept my distance from everyone. Then came the night that ended everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had a lab that afternoon and stayed late with my partner to finish up a water sample report. I didn't get home until after 10. My porch light was off. That was the first sign something was wrong. I always left it on. I stepped slowly up to the door, holding my keys tight. The shadows felt deeper than usual. I didn't hear anything. No crickets, no breeze. Just silence. I unlocked the door, stepped in and froze. Something was wrong. It smelled wrong, like cologne and sweat and something metallic. I backed out immediately, heart hammering, and sprinted to the Larkins' house. Mr. Larkin opened the door and saw the panic on my face. "Someone's in my house," I said. He didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside and called the cops. They came in under 10 minutes, guns drawn, flashlights sweeping. It didn't take long. He was under my bed. Raymond Cutler, lying on his stomach, holding a camera and a kitchen knife he'd taken from my drawer. There was duct tape in his pocket, gloves, a bottle of pills. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Just looked at me as they pulled him out. The aftermath was chaos. Police statements, campus security, trauma counselors. The university put me in emergency housing. They covered my rent for the rest of the semester. My mom came up from Alabama and stayed in a motel for 2 weeks. I couldn't sleep. The worst part? When they searched Raymond's house, they found dozens of photos of me, walking to campus, sitting at the coffee shop, studying at my window. He had a notebook too, filled with writing, obsessive, delusional stuff about how she's the only one who sees me, and she belongs here now. They never figured out how many times he'd been inside my house. It's been almost a year. I live across the state now, in a high-rise with a doorman and security cameras. I still study environmental science. I still call my mom every Sunday. But I don't open my windows anymore. I don't trust friendly neighbors. And sometimes, even now, I wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I heard someone breathing under the bed. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had come home just 30 minutes later, if Mr. Larkin hadn't answered his door, if I had ignored my gut. Some monsters don't hide under beds. They live next door. Story 8. I was 29 when I bought my first house, and it felt like I'd finally done something right. After years of bouncing between overpriced rentals and living out of a suitcase for work, I wanted roots. Something solid. I worked in advertising. Long hours, demanding clients, constant pressure. But it paid enough that I could scrape together a down payment and get out of my shoebox apartment in Baltimore. The city had worn me down, chewed me up with noise and people and crime. So I found this place, a small house, 2 bedrooms, pale blue shutters, with a little porch that creaked when you stepped on it. It sat near the edge of a neighborhood called Briar Glen, a sleepy suburb tucked into the folds of southern Pennsylvania. The realtor had called it up and coming, but really it was just quiet, and quiet was what I needed. It was me and Bo now, my 7-year-old golden retriever with a goofy grin and a tail that could sweep a coffee table clear in one swipe. He'd been with me since college, through job changes, breakups, and the year I spent borderline depressed, watching late-night infomercials and convincing myself I was dying every time I had a headache. Bo got me through it. Honestly, I think I got the house more for him than for me. The first few days in Briar Glen passed in a blur of unpacking, setting up utilities, cursing at IKEA instructions. My neighbors were polite enough. Head nods, waves from porches. Nobody nosy, nobody overbearing. It was on the 4th day that I met her. I was fixing the latch on the backyard gate when I heard the voice. Light, almost musical. New in town? I turned. A woman was standing just outside the fence line. She looked to be in her early 70s, with shoulder-length gray hair curled at the ends like she'd just stepped out of a salon. She wore a pale green dress with tiny white flowers on it, the kind you'd see in a catalog from a decade ago. Yeah, I said, brushing dirt from my hands. Just moved in. She smiled and held up a foil-covered plate. Thought I'd stop by and welcome you properly. I'm Evelyn. I live just 2 houses down. I opened the gate and stepped closer, taking the plate. It was warm. Thank you. That's really kind. They're oatmeal raisin, she said. My grandmother's recipe. I smiled back. I'm Nate, by the way. Nate Holloway. And this is Bo. Bo padded up to sniff at her feet, tail wagging lazily. Oh, he's beautiful, she said, bending down slightly. What a sweetheart. He is, I said, scratching behind his ears. Thanks again for these. It's rare to find neighbors this welcoming. She waved it off like it was nothing. Well, we look out for each other around here. If you ever need anything, sugar, flashlight, someone to feed the dog, I'm just down the road. I thanked her again and watched her walk away, her gait slow but steady, the kind of woman you trusted instantly, the kind who'd probably raised a family, baked pies for church events, sent Christmas cards to everyone on the block. That night I left the cookies on the counter. I was never big on sweets. Maybe I'd bring them into work, or give them to the mailman. It was the thought that counted, but Bo had other plans. I didn't realize he'd gotten into them until the next morning. I woke up to the sound of him retching on the hardwood floor. Bo! I knelt beside him, heart thudding. His eyes were glassy, his breath shallow. Foam lined his gums. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, wrapped him in a blanket, and drove to the nearest emergency vet 10 miles away. The text took him back immediately. I paced the waiting room like a lunatic, fingers locked so tight I couldn't feel my knuckles. 20 minutes later, a vet came out, a tall man with tired eyes. Mr. Holloway? Yeah, is he okay? He paused. He's stable. We've induced vomiting and started fluids, but it looks like he ingested a substance called bromadiolone. My mouth went dry. What the hell is that? Rodent poison, he said. It causes internal bleeding. Powerful stuff. Was there any chance he got into bait traps? No, I said automatically. I just moved in. I haven't even unpacked the garage yet. Any food he might have gotten into, I thought back. The cookies. Someone gave me baked goods yesterday. My neighbor, Evelyn. He might have eaten one. The vet's face hardened. Then I'd suggest calling the police. The cops came later that day. I gave a statement, described Evelyn, her dress, her smile, her voice. They canvassed the neighborhood. Here's the part that still gives me chills. There was no Evelyn 2 doors down. In fact, the house 2 doors down had been vacant for over 8 months. Foreclosure. The real estate sign had been pulled weeks ago. Nobody on the street knew a woman named Evelyn. I thought maybe I'd gotten the house wrong. Maybe she lived elsewhere in the neighborhood. But the police checked. They asked every resident. Nobody had seen her. There was no record of her living in Briar Glen. No Evelyn matching that description in any of the county records going back years. And the cookies? Lab results later confirmed they'd been laced with commercial-grade rodenticide, just enough to be fatal to a dog Bo's size. He only lived because he threw up most of it. For the next month, I barely slept. I changed all the locks, installed cameras, motion lights. Every time I saw a figure walking past after dark, my heart raced. I kept Bo close. No backyard time unless I was standing right there beside him. Twice I thought I saw her again. Once, across the street near the old vacant house. Just standing there, hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes fixed on mine. The second time was worse. I was walking Bo around the block near dusk, and as we turned a corner, I saw her standing behind a hedge. Smiling, not moving, just watching. I ran. Didn't look back until I was inside, door locked, gun from the glove compartment in my hand. When the cops checked again, they found nothing. No footprints, no sign of trespassing, no security footage. It was like she slipped in and out of existence. One afternoon, about 6 weeks later, I was grabbing my mail when I noticed a man standing by the curb. Late 60s maybe, wearing a ball cap and cargo vest. He looked at me, then at my house. "You live here now?" I nodded. "Yeah, why?" He shook his head. "Damn, you're the third." "The third what?" He looked around, lowered his voice. "People don't stay long in that house. The guy before you moved out after someone left a dead bird nailed to his door. Said he kept getting these notes that just said, 'You don't belong.' Before that, it was a woman with a cat. Cat died. Vet said it was poisoned. Same story. Someone gave her welcome muffins." He met my eyes. "You ever hear of Evelyn?" My blood went cold. I nodded slowly. "She used to live here. That house, yours. Lost her mind after her son died. They say she started slipping. Accused neighbors of stealing from her. Said kids were mocking her from the sidewalk. Then one day she just disappeared. Nobody ever found her. House was empty for years." I swallowed hard. "That was 10 years ago?" He nodded. "Sounds about right." It's been almost a year since that day. Bo made a full recovery, though he's more anxious now. We both are. I keep the cameras on, the porch light brighter than ever. I don't accept food from anyone. And when I walk Bo at night, I stay in the center of the road, under the streetlights, far from bushes or shadows. Sometimes I still see her. At the edge of my vision, a flicker of pale green, always smiling, always watching. I haven't moved. I won't let her drive me out like she did the others. But if she ever steps foot on my porch again, she won't walk away. I don't care if she's dead or not. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. If you haven't already, I'll see you again with another horror story. Until then, bye.